What do you order?
I don't know. What do you want?
Soup, actually. I want soup.
Soup is like not super good for delivery, but, you know, I mean...
Hello and welcome to the 538 Politics Podcast. I'm Galen Druk, and I think we're going to call this the midterms review episode. So we've had a day or so to digest the results of Tuesday's elections. Of course, we know that Democrats won the House and Republicans are holding on to the Senate, but this is 538, so it's the data underneath those results that we're so interested in. And here with me to dig into that data are Editor-in-Chief Nate Silver. Hey, Nate, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good.
No, I should be more chipper.
Yeah.
Good.
This is your first time on the podcast since the results came in.
Yeah, good.
Okay. And managing editor Micah Cohen, how are you doing?
Good, Galen. Thanks for having me.
And Claire is out today, but we,
Boo.
unfortunately, we are going to start to dig into the numbers. And of course, a lot of what we'll talk about today will probably inform our coverage going forward. So this is not our last conversation about the midterms and the trends. So we'll have plenty more time to talk about that with Claire, of course. But Nate, since this is your first time on the podcast since Monday, a lot has happened since then. As concisely as possible, if you could, what happened on Tuesday night?
One sentence.
One sentence.
Democrats did super well in the House and not very well in the Senate. I mean, what do you mean?
No, that's the answer.
Was it a blue wave?
I think yes. I think losing a bunch of these toss-up Senate races nonetheless is consequential. I mean, look, it's going to wind up being, right now showing 37 seats for Democrats in the House. Could wind up being anywhere from like 35 to 40. There are actually quite a few uncalled races. I mean, that's actually exactly in line, almost like eerily so, with what the 38
it's like
projections
literally
were.
the modal outcome.
Yeah, I mean, we had, I think, in Deluxe it was 36, and it was 39 in Classic, and 38 in polls only. So, it's right on the nose of where we thought it would be. In the Senate, I think we had R+1. It looked like it's probably going to be R+2, although, again, 3 unresolved races right there. So, on the one hand, and obviously some of it, if I am too narrow in, how polls and forecasts and whatever did, and the arguments that I will have now or will avoid, from a polling and forecasting standpoint, then this was kind of like really in the 90th percentile of like where things just go exactly as you think they will. But like if you back up and say, how do you get an outcome where all these Democrats lose in the Senate, all these incumbents, and yet they pick up 35 or 40 House seats? I mean, the way you get it is that you have a really blue-leaning year on the one hand. You have a lot of anti-incumbent sentiment on the other hand, so a lot of Republican incumbents lost in the House. In the Senate, a lot of Democratic incumbents lost. And in fact, Democrats beat Dean Heller, who was one Republican incumbent. Beto O'Rourke came actually within 2.5 points of beating Ted Cruz, which is a pretty good result. And so it didn't help to be an incumbent. And number 3, clearly, politics are very polar now, and there just is a point at which a district or a state is too red to vote for a Democrat.
And mostly you're talking about the Senate there.
The Senate, right? Because there you get into what we would classify as like R+15 or R+20 or R+25 states, right? And that's a bridge too far. Democrats can do perfectly well in a year like this in the R+7s and R+10s and R+13s and stuff, and some of them are changing, so they're not as Republican as they used to be. But these places that voted for Trump like 70-30, literally,
They're not going blue.
They're not going blue. If they aren't going blue this year, then
it's not going to happen. And we'll go chamber by chamber in this conversation, but top line, Micah, I know Tuesday night / Wednesday morning, you were already making the case that, yeah, this should be considered a Democratic wave. It seems like that hasn't been like the main narrative, or there's been some skepticism about whether or not it was a great night for Democrats. Why do you think that is?
A couple of reasons. Let me give you the snarky answer is that
people are paying attention to the data?
Yeah, it's like people are kind of stupid. When we came out of election night, early Wednesday morning or late Tuesday night, it seemed like Democrats would gain, 30, 31 seats. And now it looks like they're going to gain 36, 37, 38, something like that, right? That's not a big difference, but I do think if late on Tuesday it had looked like Democrats were going to gain in the higher 30s, I think the narrative would be different now.
Democrats also went because I'm on air on ABC, and so you're very aware of obviously you're part of this coverage, and this is the mainstream media literally, and you're embedded in the mainstream media on their set on election night. It was fairly late into the night before Democrats got a call in a tough race.
Yeah.
Right? The first things that were out were Indiana and Kentucky, and Donnelly lost badly, and McGrath lost narrowly. So those were the two things that people were supposed to watch at the start. Those both went kind of badly for Democrats. And then the next thing people started to watch was Florida, which was also not a great state for Democrats. So we're going to go back and look. We had a model that went at one point and said when all the way from Democrats were 85% favorites to take the House, went all the way almost to 50-50, and then began going back up. But that's because if you're looking at Kentucky, Indiana, and Florida, those were maybe the three worst states for Democrats, and they happen to be the three worst states to report. And so that narrative... Look, we built a model that kind of tried to evaluate it, and that model said, yeah, actually, this is kind of a good Republican night relative to expectations so far. But, Democrats did perfectly well in the Midwest with the exception of Ohio. The other regions of the country, they did exactly as well as you would think.
But that early, maybe Republicans are going to overperform, ends up having an outsized effect on even the day after narrative, even when after that we got a whole bunch of new information. And you see this happen in presidential debates, where I think there's actually even research showing the first 3 minutes of a debate, the narrative gets set. Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of it. My other question is, the House National Popular Vote, to me, is really important in whether you call this a blue wave or not. Right now, Nate, where is it?
We have it at 6 based on ABC News count, and I think it's safe to assume that there's a point or so worth of gain in there for Democrats, and it might be a little bit more than that. My heuristic has been that, take whatever the popular vote is as of the morning after the election when you wake up, and then add about 2 points to Democrats for it.
Because California,
Washington, and then also you have inner cities sometimes are slow to report their results, right? So you get provisional ballots in. There are some races in Massachusetts where the Democrat won uncontested and they kind of didn't count all the votes yet, and they will get back around to that. But some of these really blue districts sometimes, so I'll probably get up to 7. It wouldn't shock me if it got up to 8. I don't think it'll get beyond that.
Yeah. So to me, let's say it ends up at 7. So if Democrats won the national popular vote by 7 points, pick up 36 to 37, 38 seats in the House, that's a wave. And it's not a gigantic wave. It's not as big of a wave as Republicans had in 2010, for example, right?
Well, in terms of seat count, but not necessarily in terms of House popular vote.
So that's the key, is I think what people should use the word wave to mean is how the country feels. We talked about this a little bit. And then it is worth it to me for people in the media to then differentiate and add the nuance of here's how the country feels, here's how that was filtered into seats. The flying the ointment to me really, in terms of if you're a Democrat trying to say, hey, this was an amazing night for us, isn't really the Senate. I think the Senate went really poorly for them, but that was mostly a function of what states were up. It's kind of governor's races where, Nate, I'm not sure it's accurate to say Democrats underperformed in governor's races.
They were at so one way to do it, you can look at kind of what is the number of people they'll control, right? I think if they wind up on that chart in the 30th percentile of outcomes from worst to best. So it's within kind of the normal range, but
but on the low end of
although
the
again,
range.
if technically there's going to be a recount in Florida, it looks like, but it's like one state removed. It's one big state removed, right? If they had these results and they did win Wisconsin, they did win Michigan, they did win Kansas, they won Nevada. So, again, by the way, some of these also, you want to talk about the narrative, Wisconsin and Nevada came in late on Tuesday night, and so things feel better for Democrats now that you have Scott Walker as one of the people you beat.
That's the other thing.
And they win Maine, and it looks like they're going to win Connecticut. Someone else said on Twitter, so I'm stealing this, it is kind of if Democrats had won those 2 races in Florida, then
the narrative would
I think everyone will then call it a wave, right? And so therefore the fact that you're down in one of these races in Florida by 0.6 of a point, the other one by 0.2 of a point, and that's the difference between a wave and a non-wave. There's at least got to be wave-ish.
Yeah.
So, and there's going to be a recount.
Exactly, yeah. So I think here are my main takeaways, main narratives of the night. number one, really good night for Democrats, whether you want to call it a wave, whatever. I think it's wave-ish. Two, partisanship wins out. In particular, partisanship beats incumbency. Nate looked like he was going to argue with that, but maybe not.
You could argue with that.
it did. I mean, that's what we were saying. I thought I already gave that take, though. But
no, I'm summarizing.
Yeah.
I'm summarizing.
Well, we're going to go chamber by chamber, but I think you could argue in some ways against that. You saw a lot of legacy Republican districts that have been voting Republican for half a century go blue.
I think those districts are not as Republican as they used to be.
Yeah, because people are in some ways changing their partisanship.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So we can get into the nuance of that later. But my third takeaway is the Midwest swung back towards the Democrats by a healthy bit, which is really important. Nate wrote about this. That's really important. It's important, but it's really important also in terms of 2020 in the Electoral College. That's a pretty good summary, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And now we can pick it apart as we go chamber by chamber. So let's do that. We'll go chamber by chamber. And I'll also note that we're going to have a model talk postmortem next week. So we don't have to get too into the specifics of how the election results and the model collide. And of course, you can send in your questions and we'll talk about those next week when we get to that. But let's talk about the House. Were there any surprises in the House?
I mean, we can talk about like the races that were least likely to be won that Democrats won. They won Staten Island, where I think we had them with a 20-something% chance.
The biggest upsets were
Oklahoma 5.
Yeah, Oklahoma 5 was the biggest upset according to our model. So Democrat Kendra Horn won despite having only about a 7% chance of winning. South Carolina won, second biggest upset. Democrat Joe Cunningham won despite having about a 9% chance of winning. And then New York 11, Democrat Max Rose won. He had about a 1 in 5 chance. That's the Staten Island one.
So there were like slightly too few upsets, believe it or not. Actually, Democrats got their share of upsets in the House. And these they got 3 in likely R, which is about what you'd expect from their pool of likely Rs. Republicans didn't really win any tough holds against the odds. What's their biggest upset?
It's not a big upset. It's Ron DeSantis winning in Florida governor, which is not a big upset.
And they only took one House seat from Democrats, which was Minnesota's 8th, the Iron Range. It was actually one of the districts that swung the most from Obama to Trump between 2012 and 2016.
They won that by 5, and Democrats had kind of given up on that district. You wonder, actually, with the 5-point loss, if that was premature or not.
But to me, the surprising thing in the House was how few surprises there were.
Well, and how toss-uppy the toss-ups were. So Democrats won slightly more than half of the toss-ups. They won about as many likely Republican districts you would expect, which is about 1 in 10 of them, right? And then, I think they went 0 for 7 in the lean races.
They won 3 likely R races and 0 lean R races,
which is kind of weird. Except there were only 7 lean R races and a shitload of
likely R. Yeah.
And so, is part of the reason that the model did quote unquote so well that we had
quote unquote.
Well, you just said that we predicted kind of more uncertainty than there actually was. There was less uncertainty. And so is part of that we had more polling than we usually do? We had
I think there are
Siena
2
college polls.
I think there are 2.
Model was underconfident, man. You better get your shit together.
So one is that your errors are going to be clustered in certain years, right? If you have a year where the polls are low on Democrats by 4 points across the board, then half of your likely R races or whatever are going to be called incorrectly, right? And so therefore, these years when we are underconfident and where more winners win than are supposed to win, you bank that for the year that will happen in, who knows, 2026 or something, when massive polling error and all of a sudden a lot of your predictions are wrong, right? The second question is, but maybe these upshot polls, maybe they
Other Nate.
They made our forecast too good. No, but there was a lot of polling, and it was pretty good polling, whereas in the Senate, some of the polling was kind of pretty dicey, I think.
One of the big questions we've had over the past couple years is how the parties would perform in Romney-Clinton districts versus Obama-Trump districts. Romney-Clinton districts oftentimes meaning your better off, better educated suburban district. Obama-Trump district oftentimes meaning a more white working class district. At this point, what can we say about how the two parties performed in those types of districts?
In the Romney-Clinton districts, Democrats did very well. And in fact, there are none of those districts that are necessarily guaranteed to go to the GOP. Texas 23, which is Will Hurd's district, that covers San Antonio and then parts of southwest Texas, has been called for, heard by some networks. There was some irregularity when they were counting the vote there. We at 538 have not called that yet. That will probably go Republican. Then there are 4 uncalled California districts, of which maybe 1 or 2 of those they have a shot. But you're probably going to wind up with Democrats down to picking up, say, all but 2. Let's say they do lose Text 23 in one of the California ones.
And how many is that in total?
So they're going to win 11-ish out of 13.
They cleaned up in Romney-Clinton districts. They did perfectly well in Obama-Trump districts.
They also did well in the Obama, yeah. But, I mean, they had some incumbents there, right? And there are a couple of uncalled races there, too. It looks like they probably will win New Jersey 3. Maine 2 is going to go to a instant runoff. But those are a little bit more diverse mixed set of districts. And, they did well in a bunch of, they won 3 in Iowa, right? And so, they did well on both is a short answer.
A little better in Romney.
A little better in Romney.
Look, I think the Democratic gains were more confined to the suburbs than I expected, even though I expected them to do well in the suburbs.
But they won like Oklahoma and South Carolina. I mean, it's weird.
It is a little weird. But in the House, at least, this is from a analysis Jeffrey Skelly is going to have on the site maybe by the time you hear this. Remember, he used City Lab district categorizations. Pure rural, pure urban, rural suburban, urban suburban, dense suburban, sparse suburban. 75% of the seats Democrats gained in the House were in dense suburban and sparse suburban. That's a lot. The Democratic route to a House majority runs through the suburbs, I think turned out to be mostly right, 75% right.
And I'll just add, of course, I went to Texas's 7th District, which is a great example of a suburban district that flipped to Democrats on Tuesday night. And one of the big questions was, is this trend amongst college-educated voters, in particular college-educated white voters, going to stick? They kind of fled the Republican Party when Trump was on the ticket. Is that going to revert to the mean? And in poking through some of the exit poll data this morning, it does not look like that reverted to the mean. It looks like college-educated voters stuck with Democrats at the same levels that they did in 2016, and college-educated white voters voted for Democrats. And that obviously bucks a trend of college-educated whites being part of that more Reagan Republican Party.
Totally. So, I mean, this is what explains why it was a good night for Democrats overall, right? Is that, let's use the Romney, Clinton, Obama, Trump typology to explain this. But, 1, Romney, Clinton districts continued to go Democratic. Democrats cleaned up there. 2, Obama-Trump districts reverted back to the mean, let's say. So this is why Nate wrote on the site today that the map looks scary for Trump. That's why, because he can't win if he's underperforming what a typical Republican does among college-educated whites, but not overperforming among non-college whites. Trump needs to overperform among non-college whites. In other words, he needs to keep winning those Obama-Trump districts. And look, he wasn't on the ballot, so he might do perfectly fine in 2020. But at least on Tuesday, the Obama-Trump districts, now it's like, I don't know if we need to update the names for these, but now it's like these districts are like Romney, Clinton, Democrat, Obama, Trump.
All right. One final thing on the House before we move on is we talked a lot also before the election about what kind of popular vote margin Democrats would need in order to win the House. We said it was somewhere between about 5.5 and 7. It looks like in the end, the popular vote margin is going to be around 7. Democrats won the House relatively easily. What can we say about some of those structural challenges for Democrats and what kind of popular vote margin they actually need? And when I say structural challenges, I mean gerrymandering and sorting.
I guess we can go back and, once all the results are in, we can go back and look at how much of a swing would you have needed for the GOP to take the House. Democrats did win a lot of close races. I mean, it looks like the break-even point might have been 4.5 or 5. I'm just guessing out of the blue. And our model thought it would be 5.5, which is pretty close. But look, Democrats, to take this out of model terms, talk about human election terms, what the story is. The story is that Democrats capitalized on their opportunities really well by nominating good candidates, by raising lots and lots of money, by taking the races seriously from the kind of first day of the Trump White House. And you saw that in high turnout in special elections. You saw that in the number of candidates who ran. Republicans also, I mean, people say, oh, there's no consequence to Republicans for sticking with Trump. Well, I mean, a bunch of the ones who would not want to have stuck with Trump retired. So you have a lot of retirements. But no, they played their hand really, really well in the House. I mean, to me, it almost felt at times like there was like almost implicit agreement where Democrats were like, you know what, the House is ours, the Senate is yours, right? Let's just kind of play to our strengths here a little bit. It almost felt like that a little bit. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, except that, whether Republicans gain 0 seats in the Senate or 3 seats in the Senate will make a big difference. The Senate map for Republicans in 2020 is bad. So, Nate was making this point, but like it's likely that the House, the Senate, and the presidency will all be competitive in 2020. It'll be a cluster.
So the worst for Democrats is if they lose Arizona, where there's a lot of vote out. I think they're probably underdogs, but not by much. Lose
There's
Florida.
Still over 600,000 votes out. It's like that could be anybody's at this point.
Lose Florida, which, I mean, you'd rather be not Bill Nelson. You'd rather be Rick Scott in Florida. And then they lose the Mississippi runoff, which is pretty likely. Then they'd be at 54-46 disadvantage. So they have to win 4, assuming they won the presidency in a year where they had a good enough year to net 4 senators. They have to, Doug Jones is one of the 46 Democrats, and he is maybe not the most likely member to be retained. If you saw what happened to all these Democrats in really red states this year, he's in the same boat now. So, this is why Arizona and Florida are important. If somehow Bill Nelson comes back and wins Florida, and then less of a long shot Sinema wins Arizona, then it's 53-47, then you might call the Senate a toss-up for... That's a little aggressive.
See,
that's
here we
very
go.
competitive.
Already talking about 2020. Let's talk a little bit more about the Senate. But before we do that, let me tell you that today's podcast is brought to you by WordPress. WordPress powers more than 30% of all websites, from your favorite local shops to the world's biggest companies. Join a global high-traffic network of organizations and entrepreneurs when you build your website and your business your way on WordPress.com. WordPress allows you to carve out your own corner of the web with a new custom domain name, or use one that you already own. You can create a site that fits you using templates and customizable themes. There's no design experience needed. Use a range of e-commerce options to promote and sell, from an easy-to-use payment button to a full-fledged online store. Plus, you can get your website up and running for just $4 a month. The time to grow your business is now. Build your website today and get 15% off any new purchase at wordpress.com/politics. That's wordpress.com/politics for 15% off your brand new website. wordpress.com/politics.
We use WordPress.
We do?
538, yeah.
I guess I knew that, yeah.
Yeah, you're in there all the time.
All right, let's continue talking about the Senate. Nate, it was not a great night for Democrats. We still don't have results in a number of Senate races, but what surprised you?
Some of the margins were pretty impressive for Republicans. Donnelly lost by 7.5. McCaskill lost by 6. Heitkamp lost by 11. That's not very good. Those are big swings. Manchin won by only 3. Tester won by 3. So I think just the degree to which incumbency did not help Democratic incumbents at all.
Or Republican incumbents.
Or Republicans. Heller lost by 5.
Yeah.
It's a big loss. And Cruz won by only 2.6. So a lot of vulnerability there, frankly.
No, incumbency turned out to be not worth much in the Senate, and partisanship, just the base partisanship of the states, turned out to be worth a lot.
And actually, I should point out, Micah, for people who listen to our buy, sell, hold episode on the Senate, will have maybe expected that based on what you bet on. And you bet that partisanship would win out. So
would beat incumbency.
Round
Nate,
of applause.
Did you listen to that podcast?
No.
Oh my God. Well, I did. We did buy, sell, hold with the model odds, and across the board, I bet on partisanship beating.
And was that right?
Yeah. So for example, we had Donnelly winning in Indiana. We had him as a slight favorite. I sold that because Indiana is a red state. But here's the thing: is it surprising that Donnelly lost by more than McCaskill lost by? Indiana is 18 points more Republican than the country, according to our partisan lean metric. Missouri is 19 points more Republican leaning. So that's a little surprising, right?
I mean, if you want like a quick hot take on why that could have been,
Hit it.
It's because Donnelly ran basically as a moderate Republican, whereas Claire McCaskill maybe at the end was a little more hesitant, but across the board kind of ran more as a solid Democrat. So maybe Democrats were more excited about Claire McCaskill than they were about Joe Donnelly. But of course, I have no idea.
I buy that. And then, I mean, Heitkamp lost by, 10 or 11.
Mm-hmm.
North Dakota is 33 points more Republican than the country. And then there were other surprises, like Tester only winning by 3 is, I guess actually that's not that surprising. We had the margin as like 4 or 5.
Yeah, that Montana race is pretty normal. For some reason, there were a lot of Republicans who were always convinced they could beat Tester, and that was one that was a little bit more irrational as compared to Indiana and Missouri, I think.
I guess the more surprising result is that Manchin ended up winning by such a slim margin.
Yeah, and because he won by a huge margin in 2012, I think beat his polls by quite a bit in that year. So that's a little scary. I don't think Joe Manchin's going to be a particularly easy vote for times when Democrats want him to oppose Trump again.
And so does this defy historical trends? We talked about before the election that traditionally senators who are members of the party that's out of power in Washington almost never lose their seats during the midterms.
Yeah. I mean, you've also never had such a weak incumbency advantage as you have now. You've never, I think, had polarization as high as it is now. So it's kind of, I mean, you have this experiment now. It's. I'll put it like this. It's highly useful data on which to apply to the model for future years, right? Because like the set of cases where you have very red state, very blue year Democratic incumbent, that really lets it sort out the relative importance of different variables. And the answer is that partisanship is important. Incumbency doesn't help you that much anymore. The overall climate can still shift, right? You can still have these swings where it's a D+7 or D+8, whatever winds up being year, and that's important. It means that Democrats win all those swing states, but there's some places that are kind of going to be out of reach.
But think about what that does to governing too, right? Now, if you're a senator, you are really beholden to the default partisanship of your state. And even if you're an incumbent, now you know more than ever, incumbency is not an advantage. Challengers can raise a ton of money really quickly. So the incentives for people to vote along party lines are going to be greater than ever. And I think I've seen some hints of this analysis, but I don't know if anyone has done it fully yet. But the results are going to polarize the House and Senate even more, right? Where you'll have the continuing erosion of moderates, right? Corker's now gone. McCain, call him a moderate or conservative, whatever. He was at least sometimes willing to buck the party. He's gone. Donnelly's gone. Heitkamp's gone. All these moderates are gone. You're going to have a really kind of polarized both chambers.
So let's talk about Beto O'Rourke and that Texas Senate race. As you already mentioned, O'Rourke lost to Cruz by 2.6 points. So what do we make of that race? I mean, is that a good result for Beto? A good result for Cruz?
Well, it's a good result for Cruz. He won. So
there you go.
That's important.
Does it set him up to run for president?
No, look, I think, first of all, Democrats are going to win. They picked up 2 House seats in Texas. There's an outside chance they could win a third, but it looks like 2. And it's a very gerrymandered state, and so, so pretty good for Democrats. Look, I mean...
And that probably doesn't happen without Beto.
Probably not.
Right.
Turnout was gargantuan in Texas as compared to the past. What was it, like 8 million? I mean, it's just very high. It was it doubled from the last midterm. I mean, a lot of statewide or local offices, like in Harris County, flipped and became much bluer now. And so all of a sudden now you're going to have Dallas and Houston, in addition to Austin, as being fairly Democratic cities that can be the power base for. So look, I think what's happening in Texas is a pretty big deal. What I think it means in terms of the Electoral College is that Texas is now in this group of states along with Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. These set of Sunbelt states that, frankly, right now are a little bit of a tease for Democrats, and they can win them in good blue years. They are not competitive in red years, and then in presidential years, they're kind of a lot of stories. Oh, you see that poll in Texas has Kristen Gillibrand. She's not running, right? Joe Biden's only only 2 points down on that Texas poll.
You can't laugh that off anymore.
You can't laugh that off anymore, except the result is that he loses by 2 points on election day, or 4 points on election day, or 5 points on election day, instead of losing by 10. But Texas is now a part of the equation when you talk about the strategy for, like, again, we wrote about this morning. I don't think Democrats should pursue a strategy that counts on winning Texas or puts that many chips on Texas. However, it's now in the arena where when you're placing your bets on the electoral wheel, then that's one of the bets that you can make and not be like an insane person who should be pulled out of the casino.
Texas might, in 2020, Texas might be more competitive than like Ohio. Trump won Ohio by 8 points in 2016. He won Texas by 9. You know, there's not a big difference there. You kind of have to put those in the same category. The thing I would say is, even though Beto lost, a race like this is sort of like necessary but not sufficient for Texas to become a true swing state. You needed a race where the state Democratic Party got really excited and engaged, could sign a lot of people up, could kind of get its infrastructure in place and limber and moving. And so let's not go overboard, as Nate said. Texas, I think, will be a peripheral swing state, a clearly red-leaning swing state. But I think we have entered a new phase of the map where, yeah, as Nate said, where it's in this group with Arizona, let's say, and Georgia, you know.
I mean, it's not even that far from demographically. So we actually have these similarity scores, right? Florida and Texas come out as the most similar states to one another.
Yeah.
You know, and Florida's a little bit red-leaning. People think of it as purple. It's like a little bit red-leaning and often disappoints Democrats, like it probably will this year. And so it's kind of like, you know, but Florida's like the vanguard. So one problem you have, like, let's say you lose what I call the Northern Path, which sounds like some Italian fascist political party. There's like the Northern League or something. There's like the Shining Path in Peru. So anyway, the Northern Path just sounds vaguely fascisty.
Okay.
But anyway, if Democrats totally blow it and lose all the Midwestern states they lost in 2016 rather, so they lose Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. You can add Minnesota if you want to the list of states they could lose if that path is going badly for them. Then Florida alone is not enough. You need Florida and something else. It used to be the solution was Florida and North Carolina. North Carolina is not a state where I think Democrats have had particularly they have the governorship there, right? But that's a state that's disappointed them a fair amount too. So it's like Florida, and then what's next, right? You could argue for Arizona. You could argue for North Carolina, Georgia. But Texas has maybe a equally good argument at this point. And it's also a lot of electoral votes. And so if you're right on Texas all of a sudden, then it's all of a sudden it's like the reverse where all of a sudden, oh, shoot, the GOP now, how can they win?
They have to cobble
if
together.
They're losing Texas and California and New York and all those electoral votes. So that's 12 years ahead from now, probably.
All right. Well, we've already gotten into 2020, so let's wrap our midterms review. Thank you, Nate.
Thank you.
And thank you, Micah.
Thank you.
I think this episode brings about 3 weeks of daily episodes of the podcast to a close.
Which is a good moment to turn the tables and thank Galen for making those daily episodes happen. Thank you, Galen. Very nice job.
And thank you, listeners, for consuming all this
thank you.
Content. Buy all this shit that the sponsors want you to buy.
Guess
It'll
what?
help us make more podcasts in the future.
We have another podcast tomorrow. Live show.
Yeah, we have a live show, listeners, although we're not going to put it out tomorrow night. We're going to put it out on Monday. So you have that to look forward to over the weekend. And we're going to continue to have a couple episodes a week. So keep checking back in with us even after we're finished with daily podcasts. We'll also have, as I mentioned, a Model Talk postmortem next week. That is it for now. My name is Galen Druk. Tony Chow is in the control room. You can get in touch by emailing us at podcasts@538.com. If you have Model Talk questions for next week, of course. You can also tweet at us with any questions or comments. If you're a fan of the show, leave us a rating or a review in the Apple Podcast Store. When you leave that rating, it helps our rankings, and then other people will discover the show, get to know us, and learn more about politics and data. Or you can just tell someone about the show. Anyway, thanks so much for listening, and we will see you soon.